Think about a guy just spent $2.4 million on a private jet, and he's happier about his fuel bill than his neighbor spending with a Honda Civic. Yeah, you heard that right. Stick around, because by the end of this video you're going to understand exactly why, and you might actually start doing the math on your own life. So here's the thing nobody tells you about private aviation. Everybody assumes private jet means bottomless bank account. Big plane, rich guy, big problem, right? And that's true for most jets. That assumption is correct. But there's one jet that broke that rule completely. And it's the reason regular doctors, dentists, real estate developers, and small business owners are flying private today instead of squeezing into a middle seat. It's called the Cessna Citation Mustang. And before we get into the numbers, and trust me, the numbers are wild, I want you to do one thing for me real quick. Drop a comment below telling me what plane you want me to break down next. Let's get into it. The price tag. Let's start with the number because it's the number that gets everybody's attention. $2.4 million. That was the original launch price for a brand new Citation Mustang. Straight off the line, back when Cessna first introduced this thing to the world. Today, if you go shopping on the pre-owned market, you're looking at somewhere around $2.1 million for a good used one, and that number swings depending on total hours flown, what avionics package it has, engine time remaining, and honestly, how well the last owner took care of the interior. Now let's put that in perspective, because $2.4 million sounds like an insane number until you compare it to literally anything else in this category. A mid-sized jet like a Citation XL's runs you $8 to $9 million. Step up into something like a Gulfstream, and now you're talking 20, 30, sometimes $40 million depending on the model and the year. The Mustang isn't just cheaper than those planes. It's in a completely different universe of cheap. It's the entry point. It's the plane that took "I own a jet" from a sentence only billionaires could say and turned it into a sentence a genuinely successful small business owner could say without flinching. The story is what happens after you sign the paperwork and that plane becomes yours. Because owning a jet isn't a one-time expense you pay off and forget about. It's a weekly expense. Sometimes a daily one. And that is exactly where the Mustang absolutely destroys everything else in its class. Why it's actually cheap to fly, so let's talk about why this thing is actually cheap to operate. Because this is the real headline of this entire video. Reason number one, single pilot certification. This is the big one, and most people watching have no idea this even matters. Most business jets, by law, require 2 pilots sitting up front. That's not a company policy, that's not a suggestion, that is federal regulation. And 2 pilots means 2 salaries, 2 sets of recurrent training every single year, 2 hotel rooms on every overnight trip, 2 of basically everything. The Mustang was engineered from day one to be flown legally and safely by a single pilot. 1 person, 1 salary if you're hiring a pilot. Or 0 extra salary if you get your own type rating and fly it yourself. Owner-operators who fly themselves are saving somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000 a year just by not needing a co-pilot in that right seat. Let that sink in for a second. That's a brand new luxury car every single year just saved by one design decision Cessna made almost 20 years ago. Reason number 2, the engines. The Mustang runs on 2 Pratt & Whitney PW615F turbofan engines, each one producing about 1,460 pounds of thrust. Small, efficient, and remarkably reliable for a jet in this class. At cruise altitude, somewhere between 35 and 41,000 feet, this thing sips somewhere around 70 to 95 gallons of fuel an hour, combined, for both engines. Now compare that to a typical light or mid-size jet, which can easily burn 150 to 250 gallons an hour just cruising along. We're talking almost half the fuel cost of comparable jets every single hour it's in the air. Multiply that difference out over 200 flight hours a year at $6 a gallon. and you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars in fuel savings alone every single year, compared to a slightly bigger jet that on paper doesn't look that different. Reason number 3, the avionics. It comes standard from the factory with the Garmin G1000 glass cockpit. This is not some old analog steam gauge setup from the 80s that needs a specialist mechanic flown in from 3 states away every time something hiccups. It's a modern, integrated, reliable glass cockpit system, and because so many aircraft across general aviation use this exact same platform, parts, training, and expertise are everywhere. Upgrading to the newer G1000 NXI is straightforward and well documented. That might sound like a small thing, but avionics work on older or more exotic jets can absolutely wreck a maintenance budget. The Mustang sidesteps that problem entirely. Reason number 4, overall simplicity. Smaller airframe, smaller engines, fewer complex hydraulic and pressurization systems compared to a heavy jet. That translates directly into cheaper annual inspections, cheaper replacement parts, and less time sitting in a hangar burning money while a mechanic tracks down some obscure component for a jet that only 40 of them exist in the world. Add all 4 of those factors together, one pilot, half the fuel burn. Simple modern avionics, and a simple airframe, and you start to understand exactly why this plane became an absolute legend in general aviation circles. It's not the cheapest thing that technically flies. A used prop plane will always be cheaper. But it is hands down the cheapest real jet you can buy. And if you've ever actually flown in one, or flown one yourself, you know exactly what that distinction means. How it stacks up against the competition. Now let's actually put this thing side by side with its closest rivals. Because context is everything here. Take the Embraer Phenom 100. Beautiful little jet. Similar mission, similar passenger count. It's faster than the Mustang, cruising closer to 380 knots instead of 340. But it requires a larger cabin footprint, burns more fuel, and used prices typically run higher than a comparable Mustang. You're paying a premium for that extra speed and cabin room. Take the Citation M2, which is essentially the modern spiritual successor coming out of the same manufacturer. Faster, roughly 400 knots, nicer cabin, updated systems. But it's also a newer, more expensive airplane on the used market, and you lose some of that rock-bottom operating cost advantage that made the Mustang famous in the first place. Then there's the Eclipse 500, another very light jet from around the same era, which actually undercuts the Mustang on price in some cases. But the Eclipse program had a rockier company history, went through bankruptcy, and the parts and support network is nowhere near as deep or as stable as what Cessna built around the Mustang fleet. And if we're being totally fair, we should mention turboprops too, because a lot of buyers cross-shop a Mustang against something like a TBM 900 or a Pilatus PC-12. Turboprops are genuinely cheaper to operate per hour. But you're giving up jet speed, jet altitude capability above rough weather, and frankly a lot of the prestige and smoothness that comes with true jet performance. For a lot of buyers, that trade isn't worth it. They want the jet experience. They just don't want the jet price tag that usually comes attached to it. So when you zoom out and actually compare the Mustang against everything realistically in its lane, it becomes really clear why it carved out such a specific and loyal following. It's not the fastest. It's not the roomiest. It is, without question, the smartest financial decision in the category for a very specific type of flyer. And we're going to talk about exactly who that flyer is in a few minutes. The hidden costs nobody talks about. Now and I want to be completely straight with you here. Because I'm not trying to sell you a plane, I'm trying to actually explain how this works. Owning a jet, even a cheap one, is not free. There's a version of this video that just tells you cheap, cheap, cheap on repeats at a day. That's not the video we're making. There are fixed expenses that exist whether you fly the plane once a year or 300 times a year. Hangar rent, month after month, whether the plane leaves the ground or not. Insurance, which for a jet is a whole different conversation than insuring a car, and depends heavily on your total flight hours and experience level. the annual inspection, which is mandatory and thorough. And engine maintenance programs, these are basically like an extended warranty plan, where you pay a set dollar amount per flight hour into a fund so that when the engine eventually needs a major overhaul, which can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars out of pocket, you're not blindsided by that bill all at once. Those fixed costs alone can easily run $60,000 to $90,000 a year before the plane has even left the hangar for a single flight. Then there's depreciation, and this one is sneaky because it doesn't show up as a bill in your mailbox. Every single year that jet exists, whether you flew it constantly or it sat parked, it is worth a little bit less than it was the year before. That's real money leaving your net worth quietly in the background, and a lot of first-time jet buyers don't fully account for it until they go to sell. So when people say a Mustang is cheap to own, what they actually mean is that it's cheap relative to everything else that exists in this category of aircraft. It is still, at the end of the day, a private jet. It is still going to ask you for real, serious money every single year. But compared to what else is sitting on the ramp next to it, it's the difference between renting a modest, comfortable apartment and buying a mansion you genuinely cannot afford to heat in the winter. The real numbers. All right, let's get specific. Direct operating cost, meaning fuel, the engine maintenance reserve, general maintenance, tires, brakes, all of it combined runs somewhere around $950 to $1,100 per flight hour. Fixed annual costs, meaning hangar rent, insurance premiums, the annual inspection, and navigation database subscriptions land somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000 a year, depending on where you're based and how you're insured. Now let's say you fly this thing 200 hours a year. That's a genuinely realistic number for an owner-operator who's using it for business trips during the week and family travel on the weekends. Add the direct hourly costs and the fixed annual costs together, and you're looking at roughly $250,000 to $310,000 a year total, all in, to own and actually fly this jet. I know that still sounds like an enormous amount of money to the average person watching this video, and to most people, it absolutely is. But think about what that number is actually buying you. No TSA security line. No connecting flight through a hub airport 3 states out of the way. No sitting on a tarmac for 2 hours because of a ground stop happening somewhere else in the country that has nothing to do with your actual trip. You show up to a small regional airport 15 minutes before departure. You fly directly to another small regional airport close to your actual destination. And you're shaking someone's hand in a business meeting while everyone else on your original commercial flight is still stuck at the gate arguing with a gate agent about a delay. For a business owner whose time genuinely translates into revenue, $250,000 to $300,000 a year to get back dozens, sometimes hundreds of productive hours, isn't a crazy decision. It's just math. Different math than most of us do sitting at home budgeting for groceries, sure, but it's still math. And for the right person, it checks out completely. The trade-offs. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this jet is perfect, because it's not. And honestly, if any video ever tells you a product has 0 downsides, that's usually your sign they're either selling you something or they're not being fully honest with you. The Mustang cruises around 340 knots true airspeed. That's genuinely fast for a general aviation aircraft, don't get me wrong. But a Phenom 100 or a Citation M2 will leave it behind in a straight speed comparison. You are directly trading top-end speed for dramatically lower operating costs, and for a lot of owners, that trade is more than worth it. Cabin space is tight. Let's be honest about this. This is a 4-passenger jet with a cabin height of roughly 4.5 feet. Nobody is standing up straight in this cabin. You duck when you board, you sit down. And you enjoy the flight from a seated position the entire time. And the bathroom situation, let's just say it's technically an emergency option rather than a real private lavatory experience. It's a curtain and a chemical potty, and most experienced owners just plan their trips and their pre-flight routine around simply not needing it mid-flight. Range sits around 900 to 1100 nautical miles with proper fuel reserves factored in. That comfortably covers most regional business travel across the United States. It is absolutely not going to take you coast to coast or across an ocean without at least one fuel stop along the way. So who is this plane actually built for? Someone flying 1 to 2 hour hops regularly with 2 to 4 passengers on board, doing regional trips across the country, who genuinely wants real jet speed and the ability to climb above rough weather, but has zero interest in paying mid-sized jet money to get that experience. If that description matches your actual travel pattern, this is one of the smartest aircraft ever engineered for that specific mission. If your real need is flying 6 passengers to Europe non-stop in total comfort, this obviously is not your plane. And no amount of clever marketing changes that fact. Who actually buys these things? Let's talk for a second about who's actually sitting behind that yoke. Because it's probably not who you're picturing. It's rarely a celebrity. It's rarely a hedge fund billionaire, because frankly, they've already moved up to something bigger and faster. The typical Mustang owner is a regional business owner, think a successful orthodontist with 3 practices spread across a state, a real estate developer managing properties in different cities, a manufacturing business owner who needs to personally visit client factories scattered across a 5-state region every single month. These are people whose businesses genuinely depend on being in multiple places, reliably, on a schedule that commercial airlines simply cannot guarantee. For that kind of buyer, the math isn't about luxury. It's about time. It's about reliability. It's about control over their own schedule instead of being at the mercy of a commercial airline's hub and spoke system and its cancellations. A lot of these owners actually get their own single pilot type rating and fly the plane themselves, which is a huge part of why the operating economics work out so favorably. They're not paying a professional pilot's salary at all. They're the pilot. Why this plane became a legend, here's what I personally find fascinating about the whole Mustang story. Cessna built almost 500 of these between 2006 and 2017, 470-plus units total. That number doesn't sound massive at first glance, but once you realize how genuinely small the private jet market actually is worldwide, that production run is enormous. It basically single-handedly created an entire aircraft category. Before the Mustang came along, very light jet wasn't really a phrase that normal successful people used in conversation. After the Mustang, it became the entry point into an entirely different way of traveling for an entirely new group of buyers who never would have considered jet ownership before. And because so many were built, the used market today is genuinely healthy in a way that a lot of smaller production aircraft simply aren't. Parts are readily available. Mechanics who know this airframe inside and out are not hard to track down at any decent regional maintenance shop. Resale values, while they naturally decline with age like literally any aircraft on Earth, have stayed relatively stable over time. Because demand for a reliable, genuinely cheap-to-run, very light jet has never really gone away, even as newer competitors have entered the market. That's the real reason this plane still comes up constantly in aviation conversations almost 2 decades after it was first announced. It's not nostalgia talking. It's that nobody has fully replaced what it does: real jet performance, true single-pilot operation, and an operating budget that a successful small business owner, not just a billionaire with a family office managing his finances, can actually justify on a spreadsheet. The biggest myth about private jets, before we get to the rapid-fire facts. I want to bust one myth that this entire video kind of revolves around, because I think it's the real reason people click on videos like this one in the first place. The myth is that private jets are exclusively a billionaire's toy. That flying private automatically means you've got a net worth with 9 zeros in it. And look, for the giant Gulfstreams and the Global Expresses, sure, that's usually true. But the Mustang quietly proved that wrong for an entire segment of buyers who nobody was really talking about. Think about a regional trucking company owner who needs to personally inspect distribution hubs in 4 different states every single week. Think about a cardiologist who splits time between two hospital systems 90 minutes apart by car, but 18 minutes apart by air. These aren't people with private islands. These are people running real businesses, making real payroll, who did the math and realized that burning 3 hours a day sitting in an airport terminal was costing them more than the jet itself. That's the actual story behind this airplane. It's not about flash. It's not about being seen at the airport. Most Mustang owners fly into airports so small you've probably never heard of them, specifically because those are the airports closest to where they actually need to be. The whole point of this jet was never to impress anyone, it was to save time. And time, especially for a business owner, is the one thing money genuinely cannot buy back once it's gone. It's not a flashy hypercar of the sky, it's a genuinely smart financial tool that happens to also be an airplane, and there just aren't that many products out there where the practical choice and the exciting choice happen to be exactly the same thing.